Hey, ghoul friend. It's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I want to ask you to wish Susto a happy birthday. As we celebrate the upcoming 5th anniversary of Susto and its dedication to exploring the rich tapestry of Latin American and Hispanic folklore, I invite you to join me in taking this paranormal project to the next level. Over the past 5 years, I've delved deep into the mysterious realms of ghostly apparitions, supernatural legends, and chilling tales that have captivated audiences worldwide. Now, as I embark on the next chapter of this journey into the unknown, I need your support to enhance your experience as a listener. Your generous donation will allow me to invest in a new recording setup, ensuring that future spine-chilling narratives are captured with crystal ball clarity and devilish detail. With upgraded equipment, I'll be able to host ghoulish guests with greater ease and transport you even deeper into the heart of darkness, where legends come alive and the paranormal awaits. Every dollar contributed will aid in advancing the quality of Susto, enabling me to continue preserving and sharing the enchanting folklore of Latin American and Hispanic cultures with the world. Join me in celebrating 5 years of fear-inducing tales and help me amplify this spooky saga for many more to come. Together, we can unlock the secrets of the supernatural and keep the spirit of storytelling alive. To make a donation, you can visit gofund.me/10bcdc27. Thank you for your support, and may the spirits guide you on your journey through the unknown. Eternally yours, Adrian or Ayden. Either way. Ghoul friends, it's me, Adrian, or Ayden. Either way, I am still your host, and you are still listening to Susto, the podcast centered on paranormal folklore from Latin American and Hispanic cultures. Ooh, that's new, isn't it? Listen, okay, so I was thinking about this the other day. I was running through it in my head, and what I just said is how I pitch the show to new people when I'm networking and all that. So I decided it would just make sense to say that on the show as well. I also feel like it is a more accurate description. I mean, Ookie Spooky Scary Stories is also accurate, and obviously we're still going to be doing that, but that's more, I think, in line with what the show is. So I hope you like it. Let me know in a comment in the Spotify Q&A what you think, if the change is scary or if you enjoy it, or just give me some feedback, and I'll listen to you, of course. Also, if you are a best ghoul friend on patreon.com/sustopodcast, link in bio, then you're watching me. We're looking at each other right now, and look, our office/guest room is mostly clean. There is a bed set up over here because I had some family in town recently, but because they came into town, it finally forced me to organize and clean this room. So I was like, you know what, let's use it. So we got some really nice ambient lighting here. My face is right here on camera. So you can watch this episode if you are a best ghoul friend on Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, I was just talking to Jeff earlier. I was saying I think I want to do a Summerween series for the best ghoul friends. So typically I try to do once a month, like a virtual hangout or a movie night or something. So I think for summer, so July and August, I want to do as many as I can every weekend. I want to do a virtual hangout. So keep your eyes on social media. That's at Susto Podcast. If you are a Patreon subscriber, then I will be, of course, posting links and stuff on there. But again, it will be a best ghoul friend exclusive. So check it out. See if any of those tiers work for you. And if not, listen, the show is always free. There are free and easy ways to support the show, like liking, following, subscribing wherever you're listening, interacting with the show, sharing it with your ghoul friends. Some of the best ways to support the show, and I truly always appreciate it. Speaking of appreciation, thank you so much for your patience. When I took the week off last week, there was just a lot happening, and I said, you know what? That was in action every time someone asks me, how do you do it? You know, how do you do the podcast on your own? How do you have a full-time job, personal life, all of that? What is the balance there? Sometimes you just have to do a hard stop and say, okay, this is it. I'm pausing, I'm taking a break, and I will be back. Don't worry. Just like not freaking yourself out about giving yourself some space and some grace. Again, thank you so much for waiting it out with me. It was just 1 week. Here I am. Better than ever. Appreciate that so much. Before we move on to the episode, I'm so excited. Next week is finally the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival happening in Denver, Colorado. It will be my first time ever being in Colorado, in Denver. I'm so excited. It's happening July 12th through the 14th. You can visit truecrimepodcastfestival.com to get your tickets. You can use code SUSTO15 to get 15% off of your ticket. You can also use code Paranormal15. I will be doing 2 sessions at the festival. I'm doing a panel with other amazing podcasters from Spooky Tales, Haunted Detective, and Stephanie Strange. We're doing a panel on haunted histories, ethical storytelling of folklore from different cultures. And then I'm also doing a Susto Live. Very excited for that. It's going to be so much fun. I tabled last year when they were here in Austin, and literally the last day of the festival, I said, this was too much fun. I cannot miss this next year. And I bought my ticket right away for this year. So again, if you are going to be in Denver, Colorado, I highly suggest checking it out. Of course, there are links in my bio. The ad plays, I think, before, during the show if you're not a Patreon subscriber, so you can hear it there, or you can visit truecrimepodcastfestival.com. All right, I think those are all the updates for the show. As always, if you have your own scary stories, videos, photos, audio recordings, anything you think is spooky that you would like me to share on a Letters from the Beyond episode or on the social medias, that's at Susto Podcast on every platform, you know how to get them to me. Send them to me in a DM, social media, email me, visit the website sustopodcast.com, leave it in a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or in the Spotify Q&A, or you can use a ritual to visit me while I'm sleeping and deliver your story that way. Easy, right? It's super easy ways to get a hold of me there. With all that being said, again, thank you so much for being here. Today we will be continuing the Curanderismo series, and we will be talking about La Santa de Cábora, Teresa Urrea.
Hey, what's up? I'm Charlie.
And I'm Tyler.
And we are Believing the Bizarre,
a paranormal podcast that dives into the unknown and the unusual every Tuesday.
We discuss hauntings, cryptids, aliens, UFO encounters, conspiracies, and more.
And we break down whether or not we find them believable.
All right, listen, if you're not paying for electricity, you're not paying for dinner.
Saw a terrifying looking face pressed to the window with gaping eyes.
Almost reached it when the laughter stopped suddenly, and a sound behind me made me turn around.
Sorry, I was gonna do it, but then I had SpaceX.
So we got you covered, whether you like horror or laughs, or both. We actually really hope it's both.
With over 3 million downloads, you'll be joining a bizarro community that we promise is more than just Mothman and our parents.
We even take creepy stories from our listeners and turn them into episodes.
Check out Believing the Bizarre on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Believing the Bizarre, a podcast as bizarre as you are.
Home to some remarkable people, El Segundo Barrio is one of El Paso's oldest communities. In 1896, it was home to Teresa Urrea, one of the most important and influential women to walk the southwestern United States and northern Mexico. Aside from her healing knowledge as a curandera, she is known for her political role in the years leading up to the Mexican Revolution. David D. Romo, author of Ringside Seat to a Revolution, writes that in many ways, the Mexican Revolution on the border began with her. Through physical and psychological healing and political encouragement, Teresa Urrea became an inspiration to indigenous groups of northern Mexico, as well as to people in the United States during the reign of Mexico's dictator Porfirio Diaz and the years prior to the Mexican Revolution. On October 15, 1873, Niña Garcia Nona Maria Rebecca Chavez, later known as Teresa Urrea, was born in Ocoroni, Sinaloa, Mexico, on a ranch owned by her father, a wealthy liberal rancher named Tomas Urrea. Her mother, a servant on Urrea's Rancho de Santana, was Cayetana Chavez, a 14-year-old Tehueco Indian. Teresa spent her first 15 years with her mother and aunt, living in a servant's hut and working on the ranch. In 1888, Teresa's father recognized her as his daughter and sent for her to live in the main house of the ranch. Teresa did not go to school or learn to read until she was 9 years old. About this time, it appears that she began to call herself Teresa. Others called her by the diminutive Teresita. She became an apprentice to a folk healer or curandera named Huila at this time. Overseeing the household at Rancho de Santana, Huila not only used herbs to heal the sick and injured, but was also a midwife. Teresa learned about the medicinal uses of some 200 herbs and folk remedies, assisting Huila on her visits to expectant mothers. It appears that Teresa could put women in labor into a type of trance or hypnosis, making the birth less painful, an ability she would later use with many who came to be cured. Luis Urrea, novelist and grandnephew of Teresa, described one of her early cures on his website. A young Yaqui ranch hand had been kicked in the head by a mule. Teresa picked up a handful of dirt and spat into it, rubbing the mixture on the man's injury, resulting in instant healing. Word of Teresa's miraculous healing spread among the people in the region very quickly, and they soon began calling her a saint. William Holden, author of a book-length biography of Urrea, says that as a curandera, Teresa Urrea unselfishly provided aid to many people and took nothing in return. The art of curanderismo gave Teresa influence, something a half-Indian, half-Mexican servant girl could not even hope for in those days. Teresa lived during the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, who ruled Mexico for 35 years, quote, modernizing the country at a great cost to the poor and to indigenous tribes. Many natives were enslaved and sent south, notably the Yaquis. Her father was a political moderate who detested much of what the Diaz administration did to the native people. When he backed the wrong political candidate, Tomás Urrea left Sinaloa and moved his family to Cábora, Sonora in 1880 to escape reprisal from Diaz. Shortly after moving to Cábora, Teresa slipped into a coma. Theories suggested for the cause of this cataleptic state range from assault and attempted or completed rape by a minor who lived in the area to a form of epilepsy. This coma, or trance, lasted almost 4 months. Teresa had already been put in a coffin and was being prepared for burial when she rose up suddenly. Upon awakening, Teresa gave off an odor of roses. Urrea believed she had been visited by the Virgin Mary during her deep sleep, being left with an even more powerful gift of healing. The ranch Teresa called home in Cábora became known as the Lourdes de Mexico, according to Diane Telgen and Jim Camp in their reference book, Notable Hispanic American Women. Teresa cured people suffering from everyday illnesses and injuries, as well as from cancer, blindness, stroke, and paralysis. Soon, the news of her extraordinary healing powers spread among Mexico's northern Indian tribes and the government her father was trying to stay away from. Not only was Teresa Urrea healing the poor and sick, but she became an inspiration to these people to rebel against the perpetrators of the injustices Diaz brought upon them. While the native tribes she helped and those who knew her looked up to Teresa, her fast rise to popularity and fame did not sit well with the Mexican government or the Catholic Church. From early on, Teresa received many nicknames such as the Mexican Joan of Arc, La Niña de Cábora, and Queen of the Yaquis. However, when natives began calling her La Santa de Cábora and began treating her like a folk saint, the church became incensed. In The Power of God Against the Guns of Government, Paul Vanderwood wrote that in October 1890, when the lithographs of Teresa Urrea were presented by parishioners in Guayamas to Sonora's Bishop Herculano to be blessed, the bishop was disgusted and shocked, throwing the lithographs to the floor. Urrea was threatened with excommunication, as were those who believed in her. Historian Max Dashu said that from the onset, Urrea was denounced by the priesthood as a heretic. It did not help that Urrea felt true believers needed no intermediary to converse with God. For years, the Mexican government had subjected the Indians of northern Mexico to genocidal wars and land seizures. With no one to turn to, the Yaqui, Mayo, Tarahumara, and Tomochiteco Indians let their fury and frustration build. The corrupt government of Porfirio Diaz did not care if they lived or died. Teresa believed that the land belonged to the native Indians and should not be stolen. Telgen and Camp stated that Teresa Urrea told the Indian villagers, "God intended for you to have the lands, or he would not have given them to you." In Latin Legacies by Vicky Ruiz and Virginia Sanchez Corol, Marian Perales wrote that Porfirio Diaz claimed that his governmental policies were in the name of order and progress. Never mind that they displaced indigenous peoples, pushed small farmers out of business, and created a disaffected, politically minded middle class. Besides stripping these tribes of their land, Diaz sent many Indians throughout Mexico to work as slaves in mines and remote plantations, and controlled national, state, and local elections. Slowly, the Indian villagers' patience began to wane, and they became more and more motivated by Teresa's words. Throughout her life, however, Teresa denied active participation in politics. During the years Teresa spent in Cábora, the number of people wanting to share an experience with her increased. Alex Nava stated in the Journal of the American Academy of Religion that more and more Indian villagers would flock to Teresa's home, hoping that she would bring God's presence to the troubled and chaotic circumstances in their lives. In one of the best-known rebellions attributed to Urrea, a group of armed Yaqui, Tomochiteco, Tarahumara, and Mayo Indians defeated Diaz's Federales at the village of Tomochic, whose residents adored Urrea and had a hand-carved icon of her in their church. The Indian villagers were able to hold the Federales off for a few weeks before the soldiers burned the village to the ground. Scores of women and children were burned to death while hiding in the town's church. After the Battle of Tomochic, the Indian villagers started calling themselves Teresitas, and their battle cry became, "Viva la Santa de Cábora." After another small revolt against the Mexican government, Diaz ordered Teresa and her family to be deported and had 500 of his soldiers enforce the exile. Once he realized she was the Santa de Cábora, Diaz called Teresa the most dangerous girl in Mexico. Teresa and the rest of the Urrea family were deported to Nogales, Arizona in 1892. The family arrived by train only to find local journalists among her followers seeking a few words with La Santa de Cábora. Fearing pressure from the Mexican government, the Urrea family moved to El Bosque, a small farming community outside of Nogales, and later to Solomonville, Arizona, in November 1895. By 1896, political trouble found Teresa once more. Solomonville briefly became the site of El Independiente, an anti-Diaz newspaper published by Lauro Aguirre and Flores Chapa, two Mexican liberals and associates of Teresa's father. Moving their paper to El Paso, Aguirre and Chapa were arrested, charged with committing subversive acts, including the intention to engage in revolution, as Mario T. Garcia wrote in Desert Immigrants. They were tried in an El Paso court. W.H. Burgess, a well-known El Paso lawyer, defended the men. The court didn't find any real evidence of revolutionary activity. "I am publishing a paper against Mexico," Aguirre told the court, "because I hope to remedy the evils by pointing out what they will lead to." The court found Aguirre and Chapa were just exercising their freedom of speech. During the trial, attention began to focus on Teresa's involvement in the alleged conspiracy. In Las Tejanas, 300 Years of History, Teresa P. Acosta and Ruth Weingarten wrote that Teresa Urrea did in fact help the revolutionist Lauro Aguirre in the fight against Porfirio Diaz. Aguirre had often visited the Urrea ranch and had helped educate Teresita. Some historians believe that Aguirre used her to help support his own political activities. Professor Elizabeth Guerrero said that Teresa became more politically active once in the United States, allowing her picture to be taken and sold to raise funds for the resistance movement and even signing an anti-Porfirian constitution written by Aguirre. Aguirre also published an editorial signed by Urrea titled Mis ideas sobre las revoluciones en el Independiente on August 21, 1896. She maintained her innocence and insisted she never had anything to do with the rebellions. However, Dashu wrote that Teresa went on with her political organizing of El Plan de Tomochic, which denounced the genocide of the Yaqui nation, urged restoration of the liberal constitution of 1857, and called for abolition of all laws and social practices that maintained inequality based on gender, race, nationality, or class. Her support for such activities suggests Teresa was more than just a folk saint rendering aid to the poor. Once again, Teresa Urrea managed to stay clear of imprisonment by making the move to El Paso, Texas in 1896. In ringside seat to a revolution, Romo wrote, "When she did arrive on June 13, 1896, about 3,000 pilgrims camped outside her home on the corner of Overland and Campbell Streets. They had traveled by foot, wagon, and train from all over the US-Mexican border." In 1897, the Urreas moved to 500 South Oregon Street in a building which now has a historical plaque describing her and the miraculous cures she effected. Many immigrants crossing into the United States made their home in Segundo Barrio, and still do. Teresa said that she treated up to 250 people a day in El Paso. The people who waited in lines to see Teresa included the prominent and wealthy, such as El Paso's Mayor Robert Campbell and Lauro Carrillo, the ex-governor of Chihuahua. Teresa Urrea never turned anyone away, although she knew some people really didn't have any faith in her healings and were just curious to see what all the commotion was. Perales wrote that the El Paso press assisted Teresa by portraying her as an apolitical spiritual healer, allowing her to stay out of any political wrongdoing until an outbreak of border rebellions in August 1896. Francis Holden stated in an article for the Handbook of Texas Online that on the morning of August 12, 1896, at least 70 armed Teresitas attacked the Mexican custom house in Nogales. Perales says that these so-called Teresitas were made up of Yaqui, Pima, and Tomochi Indians, many of whom were laborers for the Southern Pacific Railroad. The assault on the Nogales Custom House was a protest movement against anti-agrarian and anti-indigenous Mexican land policies. Similar attacks occurred at several border towns along the Texas border. Once again, the rebels cried "Viva la Santa de Cábora," associating Teresa Urrea with the rebellion. These confrontations gave Porfirio Diaz an insight to what the indigenous tribes thought of his modernizing and urbanizing plans for Mexico, according to Perales. Holden wrote that Diaz believed Teresa Urrea was directly involved and demanded her extradition back to Mexico, a demand the United States ignored. Dashu wrote that Teresa was said to exclaim, "My poor Indians, they are the bravest and most persecuted people on earth. They will fight for their rights until they win or are wiped out. God help them, there are few of them left." Perales said that both the American and Mexican press wrote that copies of Lauro Aguirre's newspaper, El Independiente, as well as photos of Teresa were found on the Mexican rebels who attacked the custom house in Nogales. Lauro Aguirre's El Independiente took the liberty of personifying Teresa as a visionary woman, encouraging an apocalyptic revolution. In 1896, a statement from Urrea was printed in the El Paso Herald. It read, "The press generally in these days has occupied itself with my humble person in terms unfavorable in the highest degree. Since in a fashion most unjust, the fashion in the Republic of Mexico, they refer to me as participating in political matters. They connect me with the events which have happened in Nogales, Sonora, and Coyame, and Presidio del Norte, Chihuahua, where people have risen in arms against the government of Señor General Don Porfirio Diaz. I have noticed with much pain that the persons who take up arms in Mexican territory have invoked up my name in aid of the schemes they are carrying through. But I repeat, I am not one who authorizes or at the same time interferes with these proceedings. Decidedly, I am a victim, expatriated from my country since May 19, 1892. A Mexican official quoted by the New York Times said that Teresa was responsible for the death of more than 1,000 people during the uprisings by northern tribes. Telgen and Camp and other historians noted that after a short time of being a tenant in El Paso Segundo Barrio, Teresa suffered harassment and even death threats from the Catholic Church and both the United States and Mexican governments, forcing her to leave El Paso in search of a safer environment. In 1897, Teresa Urrea's father moved the family to Clifton, Arizona. Clifton was far away from political activity that lingered in cities such as El Paso. Tomás Urrea started a dairy and firewood business, and Teresa continued her healing practices. On June 22, 1900, at the age of 27, she married Guadalupe Rodriguez against her father's wishes. Her husband, a Yaqui Indian and copper mine worker, went mad on their honeymoon, shooting Teresa, and tried to take her back to Mexico. Although he did not injure Teresa seriously, he was sent to an insane asylum. After this disastrous marriage, a friend of the family convinced Teresa to leave Arizona for California in search of peace and quiet. In California, Teresa joined up with a medical company based in New York that toured the United States on a curing crusade. Her only request was that the people she rendered aid to were not to be charged. The San Francisco Examiner claimed that she cured as many as 200 people a day. Teresa later found out that the promoters were in fact profiting off her patients, so she hired a lawyer to end their contract. While in New York, Teresa competed in a beauty pageant and won. On tour in St. Louis, Teresa called her friend from Clifton, Juana Van Order, to send one of her sons to be her interpreter. Her friend sent her oldest boy, John Van Order, who was 19 years old. Teresa and John lived as husband and wife back in California and had 2 daughters, Laura in 1902 and Magdalena in 1904. Teresa's father died on September 22, 1902. She, John, and their oldest daughter, Laura, moved into Sonora Town, a small barrio in Los Angeles, California, many of whose residents were from Sonora, Mexico. There, she supported Mexican laborers fighting for higher pay. Teresa moved back to Clifton, Arizona with her family after their home in Los Angeles burned down. She had turned into the darling of Clifton's most respected and wealthiest Anglos, having cured many residents, and in particular, the son of a wealthy banker. Upon returning to Clifton, the Santa de Cábora's health began to deteriorate, and on January 11, 1906, Teresa Urrea died of tuberculosis at the young age of 33. Teresa left her 2 daughters in the hands of her comadre and longtime friend Mariana Avendano and her husband Fortunato. Many of Teresa Urrea's believers felt she had used up all the energy and power that was given to her by the Virgin Mary. They believed all the healings and stress built up throughout her life finally took its toll. Hundreds of people attended her funeral at Shannon Hill Catholic Cemetery, where she was buried next to her father. Moving from one country to another, then state to state and city to city, Teresa Urrea left a permanent imprint in the minds and hearts of all the people she healed and supported. Urrea's spiritual guidance is still called upon during the harshest and most desperate times. In El Paso's Segundo Barrio, many people are praying and hoping Teresa Urrea's spirit is with them. As she did in the past, Teresa Urrea continues to unite people of all races and classes. And although more than 100 years have passed since La Santa de Cábora physically graced our world, it is clear that she will long be a source of guidance and motivation for the poor and unrepresented. Welcome back, ghoul friends. Once more, if you are a best ghoul friend on patreon.com/sustopodcast, then you can enjoy this episode in video format. We are going to go through some, sources and other points of conversation that I wanted to talk about Teresita or La Santa de Cábora. Right off the bat, the source that I used for this entire story basically is from Library Research Guides. It's epcc.libguides.com. And again, the direct links will be linked in the Susto Google Docs on Patreon. And this was an entry by Armando Rosales Jr. in Borderlands, Teresa Urrea, La Santa de Cábora Inspired Mexican Revolution. And this is an article that was published in 2010. This was again, it was very similar to the Don Pedro Jaramillo episode where it was just like a gold mine and it was all put together so beautifully. The research was done by Armando Rosales. There were some other things though that I wanted to talk about. So speaking of Don Pedro Jaramillo, Teresa Urrea operated like him in the sense of how they performed their work. Like they didn't charge for it. They didn't expect money or anything in return really. It was just what they felt called to do. Especially Teresa, after she had this really traumatic experience, she came back with supernatural, so to speak, powers of healing. But we know that before that happened, she was already kind of learning. And in doing more research, I'm seeing that there is not debate, but there's just people are unsure about who specifically she was learning from. So I know that in this article, it says that she learned from Huila, who was the curandera she was basically the curandera of her father's estate or her father's house. And And it says that she was learning how to be a yerbera. She learned about all these herbs and their medicinal practices, but she was also a partera, or a midwife. She was helping people go through childbirth. So one of the sources that I have here is from medium.com, and it's an entry on Teresa Urrea, aka Santa Teresa, Mexican Indian midwife and healer. This is by Joanna Seltzer. This is published in 2021, also a great entry. And she wrote here, accounts vary as from whom Teresa learned midwifery and healing arts. Some reports she acquired the practice from living with her mother. Others report she apprenticed with the curandera on her father's ranch. Consensus exists that to find refuge from the autocratic Porfirio Diaz regime in the late 1800s, the family moved to Cábora in Sonora. It is in this location that Teresa begins to live as part of the Urrea family. In 1889, she fell into an extended illness/coma, reported by some as following a sexual attack, by others as a violent attack, and by others as an illness. Though her coffin was prepared, she revives, and following her recovery, she became a renowned midwife and healer by the laying on of hands, so meaning she could just place her hands on someone and heal them. Reported to have been skilled at using natural remedies to alleviate pain during natural childbirth, accounts to her nephew of Teresa's midwifery can describe the pain of childbirth as replaced by the sensation of warm honey poured over their pregnant bellies. That's amazing. News of the Saint of Cábora spread, and thousands began pilgrimage to Cábora to receive her treatments, herbs, and care. So she was like a triple threat, so to speak. She had the knowledge, the medicinal knowledge of herbs and plants. She had the healing power through touch, and she was just as we heard in the story, just an all-around baddie who fought for the rights of oppressed people, specifically indigenous peoples. That was so cool to see that aspect, because normally I don't think people think of curanderes as being involved politically that way, but it makes complete sense to me. How can you expect to heal people and to heal community when the community isn't allowed to thrive and to live peacefully? The next source that I have is from Tucson.com, and it's titled Western Women. Believers flocked to healing powers of Teresita Urrea. This is by Jan Clear Special. It says to the Arizona Daily Star, published in 2016. And I highlighted a little bit here. And this says, spending much of her time with the curandera, or healer, Huila, who had overseen the Tomas household for years, Teresita learned about the herbs and plants that the old woman used to cure ills and set the bones of those at the hacienda and surrounding villages. Much like the very first episode that I did on curanderismo, the overview, and at the presentation that I did live, we know that curanderas, they can be interdisciplinary, basically, as a way to see they can do more than one practice of curanderismo, because there are many practices. So as I just mentioned, Teresita was a yerbera, and I don't know what the word was, but the power of touch, basically the healing power of touch. Huila was also a yerbera, but also a huesera, so she did bone setting. And this continues, weeds, grass, tree roots, even cactus were all part of Huila's medicine bag. Before long, Teresita could distinguish the plants that would ease the pain of childbirth, cure a lingering illness, or calm a distressed patient. About a year after she arrived at Cábora, Teresita was stricken with an unexplainable cataleptic state. For almost 2 weeks, she lay without moving, taking no food or water, her breathing barely discernible. Don Tomas ordered the construction of her coffin. For 2 weeks, that's wild. But this continues. Suddenly, Teresita sat up and proclaimed she had spoken with the Virgin Mary, who told Teresita she now possessed extraordinary powers and should use them to cure and comfort those in need. Seeing the coffin, Teresita proffered it would soon be needed for someone else. Huila died 3 days later and was placed in the coffin meant for Teresita. That's kind of sad, but also sweet. The person that she was apprenticing with was buried in the coffin that was initially intended for her. I don't know. There's something kind of poetic about that to me. But it's also very sad, but also kind of wild, They thought she was close to death, 2 weeks, no food, no water, not responsive, and she just suddenly shoots up. I'm here, I'm back. I was contacted. I have a mission now. Sadly, this is not for me. And I wonder if she knew that it was for Huila, but she just didn't say. She was just vague and was just save it for somebody else. I honestly, if that happened, if that was me, no, but really, if that was me, I don't think I would be able to say this coffin is actually for you. It would break my heart if I came back with the knowledge that this person that I loved, that I was learning from, that gave me so many gifts, that they're going to pass away. Like, I wouldn't be able to break that news because I also probably wouldn't want to face it. I wonder if she knew who it was meant for, or if it was just a general, this is going to be needed soon, so keep it. Just interesting to think about to me. This continues. Villagers flocked to the Urrea hacienda in search of a miracle cure from Teresita. Often she would go into a trance only to wake and administer her healing powers. Sometimes she scooped up a handful of earth and mixed it with her saliva to elicit a cure, while her compelling eyes held the patient in a trance-like state. Her ministrations bewitched the local Indians, particularly the Tomochic, who hailed her as their patron saint, calling her La Santa de Cábora. But again, as we know, the Catholic Church was like, no, don't call her a saint. That's reserved specifically for us. Which is funny because they were so ready to push the religion on indigenous peoples, but when they want to adopt it and use it, no, you're not allowed. Not that way. No, don't do it that way. Whatever. You all know how I feel about that. The next one that I have here is from holisticunconscious.wordpress.com. This looks, it's a blog, it looks like, and I think it's written by, okay, I believe this blog, from what I'm picking up here, is by a Dr. Jim Whitlerk. The entry that we're reading is about, of course, Teresa Urrea, and I highlighted something where he's talking about, I guess, like the belief in these practices, but he wrote, in Mexico, people interpreted her in terms of the stereotype of the saint, which Urrea sometimes uses. For example, her sweat smelling of roses, her selfless devotion to the poor, her courage against oppression, her almost ceaseless prayers and sense of closeness to God. Particularly after coming to America, this stereotype diverges from her behavior, which, however, still remained highly altruistic. Whereas Urrea records startling healings performed at a single touch, Bain emphasizes that the most detailed record of one showed her spending a half hour in massage on one patient. It, however, comes from after her arrival in America, when Urrea depicts her healing powers as declining. In other words, stories of the magical are more extreme in credulous cultures, but is this because belief makes great miracles possible, or because events are exaggerated to fit local assumptions? I feel like if you know me, you already know what my answer is going to be. I think it's yes. I think that the belief makes these great miracles possible. With stories of like Don Pedro Jaramillo, there's stories of people going to him, and I think it's a story about a young woman wanted to have like a different hair color, and because she doesn't believe and she only does a patch of her hair, only a patch of her hair changes colors and the rest of it stays the same. That's one of the stories that I remember hearing when I was younger. But yeah, I think like many religions, many faith practices, they only serve you when you believe in them. Now, with something like curanderismo, where you're expecting to see actual physical results, I don't know if it's the same practice. You know, I would assume that complete faith is necessary for these things to work. Maybe her powers, so to speak, were dwindling in America because the belief system was different versus hello, that's why we have this podcast, is the belief in the superstitious, the supernatural, the paranormal is, I think, very prevalent in, I will just speak to my own experiences in Mexican American cultures, in Mexican cultures. Yeah, again, I do think that the belief kind of makes the healing happen. So the last couple sources I have here are talking about El Paso's Segundo Barrio, which is where one of the Urrea family's homes were, where they still stand actually. But this neighborhood was trying to basically fight off the gentrification of the area because big box stores wanted to come in and kind of like take over, which would have resulted in, getting rid of a lot of these buildings that stand, the locally owned businesses, and would probably have affected the Urrea household. I believe they do. It's a historical marker, so I don't know that they could have done anything to it, but either way, there's an article from El Paso Times that says El Paso's Segundo Barrio to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places. I believe it says here the National Register designation. This is a quote from a historian, Max Grossman, who's one of El Paso's most vocal advocates for historic preservation, according to this article. He said, the National Register designation is the most prestigious, the most important designation that a neighborhood can receive in the United States. Segundo Barrio has often been called the Ellis Island of the Southwest, even though its history predates the famous East Coast Immigration Station. The mostly working class immigrant neighborhood located downtown directly across the U.S.-Mexico border was established in 1885, according to Grossman. Ellis Island opened 7 years later. Mexican revolutionaries such as Pancho Villa and Francisco Madero plotted battles and toasted victories in Segundo Barrio bars. Future leaders of the Chicano movement held their first meeting inside the gym of the Sacred Heart Church. Segundo Barrio's famous residents include Teresa Urrea, a Mexican healer who drew in hundreds of patients per week in the early 1900s, and Nolan Richardson, a Basketball Hall of Fame honoree who in 1967 was the first black head coach at a Bowie high school. Many of the tenement buildings where Chinese, Syrian, Black, and Irish workers once lived still stand today and are home to the mostly Mexican-American residents. Many El Paso families got their first leg up in this country living in a tenement and performing humble jobs, Grossman said. Most move out of the barrio, but they never forget where they came from. They remember with tears in their eyes how hard their life was when they first got into the country. I do believe that a registration on the National Register of Historic Places is not a complete protection for the neighborhood, but it does incentivize rehabilitating the neighborhood and preserving it, if you will. So very exciting to hear. As you know, history is such a big part of this show, and I think that some of the conversations that I have about telling these stories and preserving these stories is that they're not documented the same way that other cultures, histories, and folklore has been documented. And so I think it is important to do things like this to preserve history, because that in turn is a preservation of the culture. It keeps the culture alive and it shows us where we have been, what we have done. It's really important. So very exciting. And again, if you are in El Paso, please go visit the Urrea home, take pictures for me, send me a video or something. I would love to see it. Maybe I'll make my way out there for a trip. I do love El Paso. I've been there before and I think it's beautiful. So shout out El Paso, love you all. But yeah, if you are in the area and you happen to see it, send me a picture and let me know how it is in there. But yeah, it'd be amazing to visit. Welcome back, Wolf friends. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. It was really, really exciting to see how different, I mean, of course, they're different people. They're going to be different, but I don't think I've ever really heard about curanderas being as politically involved as Teresa was, and as outspoken about the injustices that people face, that marginalized people are facing. And in her case, she was talking about indigenous people. I feel like some people would expect faith healers or spiritual healers to be like just completely bipartisan and like, well, you know, we need to understand all sides. No, Teresa was like, fuck that. Treat these people better, pay them regardless of gender, class, nationality, race. Like, just, oh my God, what a badass. I love her. I'm so excited to learn more about her. I know that there were some books published about her that were written by some of her family. I think it was like her grandnephew, great grandnephew, or grandson, or something like that. I'm gonna look it up. I definitely do not need to be adding to my to be read list, but how can I not? Again, thank you so much for listening. If you're going to be in Denver next week, July 12th through the 14th, visit truecrimepodcastfestival.com and you can get your tickets for 15% off using code SUSTO15 or Paranormal15. Again, I'm going to be doing 2 sessions. I'm going to be on the Haunted Histories panel and then doing a Susto live show. So exciting. I will see you all there. If not, I think that they are working on doing like a virtual ticket. So again, check out the website and see what your options are. As always, thank you so much for listening. I truly appreciate it. The easiest way to support the show is by interacting with it online, wherever you are listening. Follow, subscribe, share, comment, rate, review, share it with your ghoul friends. And if you have your own scary story, a video, a photo, audio recording, anything you think should be shared on a Letters from the Beyond episode or on social media, you already know how to get that to me. Make sure to follow on social media. I went live yesterday from the day I recorded this, so on the 1st of July, and I did a Summerween jack-o'-lantern. So I carved a watermelon basically, and I posted pictures on social media. It came out so cute. I'm probably going to be carving Summerween jack-o'-lanterns all summer long because it came out so cute and I loved it so much. Make sure to follow on social media for any and all updates on the show and just for some fun stuff like that. And if you are feeling generous enough, please feel free to sign up on patreon.com/sustopodcast. Speaking of, Thank you so much to this episode's patrons. You are Liza, Sadie, Rachel, Alejandra, Luther, April, Mario, Eva, Dee, Josette, Sam, Angela and Co, Mandy, Jules, Lori, Jeannie, Anna, Ashes, Neresa, Rachel, Azucena, Rios, Anna, Marlene, Chata, Lainey, Desiree, Aaliyah, Cynthia, Serena Flamenca, Lupe, Belinda, and Isaiah. Thank you all so much. It means the underworld, this world, the other world, the other side, every dimension. It means so much to me. I will talk to you in the next one. And until then, viva la Santa de Cábora. Bye.